So let's talk about history. This video is not really about the coronavirus because historically there have been far worse outbreaks. I mean, look, nobody knows where this one's going, right? But as of the moment, most of the kind of cultural chaos is more about preventive measures than response to crisis. It's not to say that people haven't gotten sick and died. It's just that people are not at this point dying in the street, and yet we as Christians are still called to run in and respond. How do we do that? Well, Christians throughout history have been pretty good at this for the most part, and I'm sure there's failures everywhere, but the reputation of Christianity speaks for itself in the history books. They take James 2 very seriously. If a brother or sister is poorly clothed and lacking in daily food, and one of you says to them, "Go in peace, be warm, be filled," without giving them what is needed for the body, what good is that? So also, faith by itself, if it does not have works, is dead. And so when there are massive problems and life-threatening issues, Christians will typically think of words like this and words like, like Jesus said, like, you clothed me when I was naked, you fed me when I was hungry, you visited me, when I was in jail, and if you did that to the least of these, you did it to me as well. And so Christians run towards it. That's just kind of this weird sort of impulse we have. But at times like this, we get to train our minds to be thinking about engaging rather than retreating. We see this right from the very beginning. There were all kinds of plagues and outbreaks in the Roman Empire in the first couple centuries of Christianity. Rome is kind of seen as this sort of glistening ancient utopia where, they were on top of the world. It was pretty much a cesspool that had some indoor plumbing for rich people and cobblestone roads. And so it was like pretty impressive at the time, but it was filthy and there was no such thing as, hygiene and sanitation, let alone, any kind of serious medicine like anywhere else in the ancient world. So anyway, there were all sorts of outbreaks everywhere. And there was one in particular under Marcus Aurelius that they think now was probably the first occurrence of smallpox in the West. And there were so many dead in Rome and the major cities in the Roman Empire that Marcus Aurelius writes about carts full, like caravans full of carts of dead people being carried out of the city to be buried who knows where. They couldn't find, they couldn't dig enough mass graves for all this stuff. So it was a serious deal. And the Christians found out that people said that whatever medical experts there were, at the time, they said that even some basic rudimentary nursing measures, some like first aid medical care type of stuff could greatly reduce the risk of mortality from some of this stuff. So the Christians were the ones to go feed the people on the street, in some cases opening up their homes to them. More likely, or more often, what would happen is where people would take their own family members who got sick and throw them outside so that they didn't contaminate the house and get everybody else sick. They would just let them die in the street right there. The Christians would keep them in their home, kind of try and quarantine them off and try and make a little space, but they would care for them because that person was made in the image of God and they had dignity. And a lot of Christians died that way by getting diseases that they would not have been exposed to had they been, thinking about themselves instead of ministering Christ to somebody. And so that's our cultural history. That's our biography right there. Been doing it since the beginning. You fast forward to the 1800s, there was a major cholera outbreak in London. And I'm going to read you a little passage from something that Charles Spurgeon wrote because he was sort of the big kahuna as far as preachers go in London at this time. And he said, "All day and sometimes all night, I went about from house to house and saw men and women dying. And oh, how glad they were to see my face. When many were afraid to enter their houses, lest they should catch the deadly disease, we who had no fear about such things found ourselves most gladly listened to when we spoke of Christ and of things divine." And so he went to people, not just members of the church, but people who were not Christians by any stretch of the imagination or actively opposed him or Christ or Christianity, and he ministered to them because they would listen. And nobody else had the guts to go in there because nobody else followed a Savior who actually conquered death. So everybody else had something to fear. Not the case with the Christians. We've got people in our church that flew to West Africa during the Ebola outbreak, not knowing what they were going to find there. The news kind of broke, and it was like, hey, there's Ebola, and people are like dying. Like your eyeballs start bleeding or whatever happens with Ebola, and boom, you're toast. That's it. There's no vaccine. There's no treatment. And, plane leaves in 2 weeks and you already got your tickets. What do? Do you cancel? And the mission team said, no, we're going. And so they went, and everything turned out okay there by the grace of God for our missionaries, not for everybody over there. But, this is normal Christianity. So I bring all of this up to say, in times like this, when we're looking at the spread of a sickness and the kind of public upheaval that causes and the dangers and some of the fears and whatever, even on a much larger scale than what we're seeing with coronavirus so far, when we see that kind of stuff, we as disciples just have this mental gear that we shift into where we say, let's go. Like, let's get in the middle of that and not try to die by any means, but there are more important things because all of that's taken care of already. How can we help? How can we share Christ? How can we meet some practical needs? So if since this is a respiratory thing, what if we got little bottles of cough medicine and something with a super drowsy effect so people could sleep a little bit better and just went around to people that we know aren't feeling well, whether they've been tested or not, and just give them that. What if we give them some food? What if you've got, you keep hearing about the runs on the toilet paper aisles, right? Okay. So what if you've got some extra TP? What if you've got a bag of rice? Maybe rather than hoarding that yourself, maybe we go to our neighbors or those that are elderly that we know are probably going to be staying home and we say, hey, I got some extra stuff. You want it? What if we could be a hub of extra material and somebody says, I got extra this, I got extra that, and we could be a distribution center for people who, either can't leave their house or don't want to at the moment, and we can come to them. So these are all things that are a normal part of the Christian life, but this is the time where we get to start thinking that way. And so I want us to train our minds to be transformed by the renewing of our minds, factoring in not just coronavirus, but factoring in the gospel and the fact that we are here to bless the world in the name of Christ, to show him, to show his glory, to show his provision, and honestly, to make it a better place while we're at it, right? So let's go ahead and do some of that. So on Sunday, we're going to be strategizing on how to do a lot of this stuff. I got ideas that your other pastors have ideas we'll be bringing to the table. You guys show up with some ideas too. And after worship on Sunday, we're gonna scatter and we're gonna spread out and administer some of these blessings to people. So it's gonna be a fun day because we're gonna act like the church that God has made us to be. So anyway, guys, we'll see you then.